Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Nazir. This is our 7th class. We have a few more to go. Um, and today we are going to be reviewing Daf 43 to 50. So we will begin on Daf 43. Now we are dealing with impurity, tum'ah, as it's called in Hebrew. So we are going to be dealing a lot with um, um, dead bodies and how they make people impure. So just, I don't know if we need a trigger warning for that, but there's going to be a lot of dead bodies. Um, but on a happy note, I don't know if I told you, but Baruch Hashem, we had a grandson a week and a half ago, so that's simcha. So we'll start with a little simcha, and then we're going to impurity. Okay, Daf 43. If you remember last week we were discussing. Also, I hope everybody had a wonderful Purim. That was also, it feels like a month ago, but I think it was last week, if I'm not mistaken. So I hope everyone had a wonderful Purim. Okay. So we're trying to construct a case that we were talking about a person becoming impure in two ways. One is by touching. In Hebrew, it's called maga. And the second way is ohel. If you remember, we discussed this last week. Tumat ohel is something very unique to a dead body, that not only does it convey impurity or tum'ah by touching it, which is what most things do, it also conveys impurity just by being in the same structure with that dead body, or standing over a dead body, as sometimes happens at a cemetery, or vice versa, right? If the body is over an object or a person. All of these convey tumat ohel. So Daf 43, the Gemara constructs a case where someone simultaneously enters a house with a dead body and touched it. And therefore, the person is liable twice for becoming impure, even though they only really become impure once, but because it's through two mechanisms, again, I'm only speaking about a Nazir or a Kohen, a priest, who are not allowed to become impure. For everybody else, there's no prohibition to become impure. There are halachic ramifications, which means there are ramifications according to Jewish law. You can't go to certain places, you can't do certain things, but there is no prohibition. However, for a Nazir and a Kohen and a priest, there is a prohibition to become impure. Therefore, if they do this as I mentioned, two ways simultaneously, so then they're liable twice. And then the Gemara says, wait a minute, and this is, we see this often in the Gemara. They don't like when things are simultaneous, because in general, it's very hard for things to be simultaneous. So the Gemara says, how really could you do it at the same time? Right? When you walk into a room, so things, you walk in, kind of your hand will get there, right? Your hand will touch the dead body before your entire body comes in to get the tumat ohel. Or, your nose walks, gets in, so you've already become impure with before you touch the dead body. Or your toe, right, walks in or gets in before. So the Gemara says, okay, you're right. That would be complicated. So the Gemara constructs a case that you a person was put in a trunk or a big, closet, and they were carried into the room. Now they're sealed, so they're not impure at all. And then you open up the bottom of the trunk, and the person falls out, and they enter the room and touch the body at exactly the same time. So, I guess don't try this at home, or you can try this at home and see if that works. Another option is that the person entered the room before the ill person died, which means they were in the room. Now the person died, and they were, let's say, holding on to them at that moment, right? A person only conveys uh, tumat met, right? The impurity of a corpse only once the person dies. Therefore, if they were already in the room and then the person died, that would be simultaneously. From here, the Gemara teaches us that a person who is on their deathbed, in Hebrew, there's a term. The term is goses. Goses means it is imminent that they are going to die. When I say imminent, I don't mean a terminal disease. I mean within the next few hours, maybe up to a day. That person is called a goses, and the Gemara tells us that that person does not convey impurity. Only once they've passed do they convey impurity. And that's learned from two different verses. Um, a a Nazir can touch somebody, right? We said a Nazir is not allowed to become impure. It's important to realize that the person cannot become, a Nazir cannot become impure from a corpse, meaning tumat met, but the Nazir can touch someone who is impure for another reason. Let's say they have tsarat, which is leprosy, or the person is a zav, which is, right, had an unnatural emission. Those people are impure, but in another category. Therefore, there is no prohibition for the Nazir to touch them. And the prohibition is only if you are pure and then you touch someone who is impure. However, not someone, a dead body. If you're already impure, so then, you know, touching a dead body 3 times doesn't get you lashes 3 times. It's only that first time that the person would get lashes. Okay, the Gemara seems to say, we mentioned that the goses, the person who is on their deathbed, doesn't transmit impurity, but it seems that the person does profane a kohen, a priest. What the significance of that is not necessarily clear, meaning it seems to be one step before making the person impure, but it does seem to be a prohibition, and therefore it seems to be complicated whether the kohen can be in that room or not. Now, we said, and we said last week, that the kohen, the priest, can become impure for for the person's immediate relatives, father, mother, sister, brother, children. However, and again, this is going to get a little gruesome, but the Gemara says that if the father was decapitated, so then the Kohen cannot become impure for that body, only if the body is whole. And again, this seems to be, I guess, when reading this, it seems to be maybe a little insensitive. Or maybe not, but I think that here the idea is that, again, we have two competing values. One is that the Kohen needs to remain pure for as long as possible, because don't forget, this Kohen is working in the temple, in the Beit HaMikdash. And if the Kohen becomes impure, now that means he cannot work for a whole week. So that is problematic. Also, there is an explicit prohibition for the Kohen to become impure. That being said, there are exceptions. So the Gemara seems to say that the exceptions are very limited. It's not a very broad exception because of this tension between these two values. So if this sounds a little, challenging, I think that's really what's going on. Um, the Gemara comes up with I don't want to say far-fetched case, but a case where the father was, on a trip in a deserted area, and then the father was decapitated. So then the priest, who's the son, cannot bury him, meaning cannot become impure by touching him, because he can get somebody else to do it. The Gemara says, no, what do you mean? This father, right, his father is in a deserted area. The body needs to be buried right away. This is called the concept, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more. Right, the concept is called a met mitzvah. The words really literally mean a corpse that I would say the mitzvah or the commandment of the corpse. What does this mean? We've been talking about the idea that the Kohen and the Nazir cannot become impure. However, and we'll see this, we're going to see this in a minute, the Gemara says if they're walking down the street or, they're walking somewhere and they see a dead body, they must become impure to bury that dead body. Meaning, this is another value in Judaism. The value of burial is extremely important. We believe that every person must be buried and properly. And if there's no one to attend to a dead body, one must bury that, stop what they're doing and bury the body. This is the concept of met mitzvah, which means it's a mitzvah to bury this person. And you don't have to wait and call and you stop everything and you bury the person. Therefore, the Gemara says, so too here with the father who is on this deserted area, the son goes and buries the father right away. So I mentioned parents. The Kohen also can become impure for his unmarried sister. Again, the idea is that these are people that he needs to take care of. If the sister is married, she has a husband, she has children maybe who can take care of her. But if she's unmarried, it is the brother's responsibility, and therefore he becomes impure. However, he does not become impure for a limb of hers. But if and since we're talking about limbs, right, if he's burying his father, so he already became impure, and then again, sorry for the graphic nature, but the Gemara says that, let's say a small bone fell off of the dead body, he can go back and pick up that small bone. Again, he's already impure, and therefore he should, collect all parts for burial. Then the Gemara finishes this by saying that, again, the Kohanim become impure for their sister, even if it's the majority of the body, meaning the spine and the skull, or majority of the bones. Again, I guess the point here is that in these days, I guess people are not always at the end of their life in one piece, I guess. So there seems to be a whole discussion about this, or maybe it is just theoretical. Okay. Yes, Lynn, we're going to get to the dust in a little bit. We haven't gotten to there yet. We're going to talk about that. Yes. Okay. Daf 44. Again, because the Kohen is responsible for his sister, he can become impure for even parts of the body. So too for other relatives as well. And here the Gemara says, right, that there's a story of the father of Rabbi Yitzchak who died, and it seems that it was very far away, and he was only told 3 weeks later, and the Gemara says that he was told that he was not allowed to move the bones because the body isn't whole anymore. The body had already decomposed, and he cannot become impure for that. And we're going to talk about that decomposition at great lengths in a few minutes. Um, Okay, let's continue to the Mishnah on Daf 44. The Mishnah tells us, and again, we know this already, so it's more of a review. There are three things that are prohibited to the Nazir, right? Eating any grape products or drinking, shaving, and becoming impure. And again, now we're going to talk about this impurity. Um, right, tum'ah, impurity, and shaving are more stringent because they negate the days of Nizirut from before, as opposed to grape products that do not. Meaning, if the person does eat or drink grape products, they don't lose the days before. Grape products are more stringent than impurity and shaving because there are no exceptions for grape products. If you remember, we said kiddush, havdalah, the person cannot drink grape products. However, you can shave or become impure because of certain exceptions, right? You can become impure for a met mitzvah, as I mentioned, for an unaccompanied dead body, and you do shave. Let's say if you become a leper or you become impure, you do shave. Um, Impurity is more stringent than shaving. Again, if you are noticing, right, each one is more stringent than the other, and vice versa. Impurity is more stringent because it does negate all previous days, and you need to bring a sacrifice. For shaving, you lose up to 30 days and you do not bring a sacrifice. So the Gemara teaches, right, there's a verse that teaches all these exceptions, and that even when there is a mitzvah, as I mentioned before, you still cannot drink wine, right? Kiddush, Havdalah. All the exceptions are learned from verses, and you can't learn one law from the other, meaning each one is unique. There's a verse that teaches that the impurity forfeits all days and not shaving, as we mentioned before. And again, we treat the person who shaves a Nazir the same way we treat the Nazir who shaves himself. Um, and the Gemara also says that there are no exceptions, as I mentioned, for drinking wine, but there are exceptions for shaving and impurity. Therefore, we can't learn one from the other. Okay, the next Mishnah tells us how does one shave when the Nazir becomes impure? So again, the person touched a dead body. What happens now? Again, this is a Nazir. Um, so the person needs to get sprinkled with, in Hebrew, what's called mei chatat. In English, we've learned this. It's basically water mixed with the ashes of the para aduma. Oh, it works well with this past week's Shabbat was Shabbat para. We read about the red heifer that was taken to Jerusalem, burnt to ash, and that ash was mixed with water and sprinkled on people who were impure because of touching a dead body. Tumat met. They are sprinkled on day 3 and day 7. Then the person shaves on day 7 and brings a sacrifice on day 8. If the person shaved on day 8, then they bring the sacrifice on that same day. They can still bring it on that day. But a mitzorah, someone who's a leper, if they shave on day 8, they also shave their body. They shave their whole body. If they shave on day 8, they have to wait till day 9. Because again, for the mitzorah, for the leper, the purification process is based on cutting the hair, and therefore you can't bring the sacrifice till the next day. But that's not the case for the Nazir. So the Gemara explains, right? Again, it depends when the person went to the mikvah. If they went to the mikvah, again, part of the purification process is going to the mikvah. If they go to the mikvah on day 7, they can shave and bring the sacrifice on day 8. If not, you have to wait till day 9. Um, okay, so here we have the concept. We're going to talk about the concept of tvul yom. Tvul yom is a person who is in the process of becoming pure, goes to the mikvah during the day. It's important to recognize that nowadays the only people who go to the mikvah for purity are women who are menstruating and married, right? Nida. But women go at night. It's important to recognize in the time of the temple, everybody went to the mikvah during the day, especially with all these other impurities. They went during the day. Now, after you go to the mikvah, you need to wait till sunset in order to become fully pure, which is why here's just some review. If you remember, the first Mishnah that we ever learned was Me'ematai Korin Hashma in Brachot. It said, when do you read Shema? When do you say Shema? And the answer was when the Kohanim, if they were impure, when they can eat their truma, meaning only after the stars come out, when the sun goes down, that's when they can eat something that requires purity. Yes, so Zohar is mentioning that men who go to the mikvah during the day. So that is true. That men who are going more for, I would say, spiritual reasons. There is a concept of purity and impurity, but more spiritual. They go during the day, actually in the morning, usually before they go to daven. Lynn is mentioning, yes, converts go to the mikvah during the day. Yes, converts go to the mikvah during the day. The nighttime is reserved for married women. Anyone else who goes to the mikvah goes during the day. So let's say if let's say a man goes to the mikvah before they get married. A bride going to the mikvah before she gets married generally goes during the day. Exactly, yes, as Zohar mentioned as well. Okay, so that's Tuvul Yom. Another concept that we have to understand is who's allowed to go where. So the Gemara, so we're going to see in a second, but Jerusalem is parallel to what the camp looked like in the desert. So if you're familiar with what the camp looked like, again, these are the Jews who are living in the desert. The tribes are all around in tents. Then you have the inner area, which is where the Leviim, the Levites, would be camped, or where, which is an inner area. And then you have the Mishkan, the tabernacle, that is where the Kohanim were or worked. So because of that, basically these camps have different names. So we have basically the Israelite camp, which is everyone can be everywhere. We have the Livia camp, which is a little bit more limited, and the Kohanim camp, which is the most limited. These are also paralleled in Jerusalem once we have a Beit HaMikdash, and important to recognize even when we nowadays that we don't have the Beit HaMikdash. So Jerusalem also, meaning obviously all of Israel is like Yisrael, right? That works well. On Har Habayit, meaning on the Temple Mount, till you get to the courtyard of the temple, that whole Temple Mount area is parallel to the Leviim camp. And then when you get to the actual courtyard and the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, that's only for the Kohanim. So that's a little bit of an introduction. So we're at the bottom of Daf 44. The Gemara tells us that a zav, right, a man or a woman who have an unnatural emission. For men, it's seminal. For a woman, it's blood. So the zav can go to the temple, to the Beit HaMikdash, only if he went to the mikvah and had already the sun went down, meaning that night, though we know that the temple is really locked, so it means basically the next day. Maybe the same thing with the Nazir. Again, we're talking about the purification process of the Nazir. Um, so Daf 45 tells us that the famous gates or doors of Nicanor, it's called Sha'ar Nicanor. These were the famous brass doors. If you remember, there was a miraculous story about them. So Sha'ar Nicanor is part of the outside, meaning the Levi'im section. If a person who is Tameh met, so then that person can enter in this area if they need to enter the temple. But again, a person who is a zav who went to the mikvah but the sun did not set yet isn't like a regular zav, and therefore meaning they're one step more pure, and they can enter the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, into Machane Livia, meaning to Har Habayit. They can enter that area. If they didn't bring the sacrifice yet, this is in Hebrew called Mechusar Kippurim. They're lacking atonement, so then they cannot enter the courtyard or the temple area either. Okay, the next Mishnah tells us, how does one shave at the end of the Nizirut process? Right? I remember, I think Lynn asked this a long time ago. So now we're going to talk about this shaving at the end of the Nazir period. The person needs to bring 3 sacrifices, a chatat, a sin offering, an asham, a guilt offering, maybe. It's similar to the sin offering, and the shlamim, which I forgot how to say in English. Someone will write it to me in a minute. The shlamim, peace offering. Okay, I guess from shalom. Okay, I don't know why, but okay. So Lynn is saying that shalem. Yeah, but interesting. Okay. No, it wouldn't be whole because dafka, specifically the shlamim, half goes to the like part goes to the kohen, part goes to the person who's bringing it. Okay. Anyway, the peace offering or the shlamim, those are the three. Those are the 3 sacrifices. So the Mishnah tells us you bring the shlamim first and then you shave, or maybe you shave after the chatat, the sin offering, because it's meant to go first. However, if the person shaved after any sacrifice, it does work, meaning there's a lechatchila, a better way to do it, but a bidi eved, meaning in the end, if the person shaved after any one of the sacrifices, it works. If they brought 3 animals but didn't specify which is going to be for which sacrifice, so then we look at which animal is fit for which sacrifice, and that's the one we bring. So now the Gemara tells us basically that the verse teaches that after the sacrifice, the person must shave. It seems to be that it's after the shlamim, right? It says you have to shave at the entrance of the temple, but obviously you don't really shave at the entrance of the temple. That doesn't seem to be very appropriate. So the Gemara is going to discuss what that means. So first, it says, so since we're talking about being appropriate, and then the Gemara talks about the Nazir. What does the Nazir do? They shave their head, and then they take the hair that they shaved and they put it into the fire where the meat is cooking. Therefore, if they have to put it into if they put it into the fire where the meat is cooking, it must be that they already brought the sacrifice. And that's how the Gemara understands that one must bring one of the sacrifices, and then when you cook the meat, again, the shlamim is the only meat that you can eat. Therefore, when you're cooking the meat, you put the hair on the fire. The Gemara says that actually the person should shave in the place where they're cooking the meat. That is the most important. Um, Interesting, the Gemara talks about where they should shave, and the Gemara says that women should not shave in the temple. We don't want the young men seeing her shaving. It might be, I guess, it's inappropriate for the men to see the woman shaving her hair, and therefore she should shave somewhere else. Okay, next Mishnah, and again, it seems to be, as we see, we've seen throughout this Masachet, men and women were becoming Nazirim. Next Mishnah, we now take the hair, as we mentioned, and you put it under the pot that's on the fire. If they did shave outside of the Beit HaMikdash, outside of the temple, so then you don't do this, meaning only if you shaved in the temple area. If the person becomes impure, so then they do not put their hair under the pot. It's only for the concluding ceremony. Or another opinion is everyone puts it under the pot unless they were impure and they shaved outside. So that was the Mishnah. The Gemara tells us that you actually take some of the liquid from the pot, right, the meat that's cooking, and you put it on the hair that's under the pot that's on the fire. I sound like Chad Gadya, but that's what you have to do. Now, if they did it under the chatat or the asham, so again, it does work, even though, as we said, it's better to do it, the best way to do it is under the shlamim. Okay, then what does the impure priest do with his hair? He actually buries his hair, or she. They bury their hair, and as opposed to burning it. Okay, the Mishnah on Daf 45. The person cooks the shlamim, or right, you could even overcook it. Shaluk means you like cook it for a long time. The kohen, the priest, takes the foreleg. Again, this is part of the sacrificial part. So the kohen takes one part of the animal, plus one loaf of unleavened bread and one unleavened wafer, a rakik, and the kohen takes all of these things and puts it on the hand of the Nazir and then waves it around. This is called tnufa. They wave it. And then the Nazir, that is the concluding process. And then the Nazir can drink wine and become impure. That's the end of the process. Rabbi Shimon says, as long as the blood of one of the sacrifices was sprinkled, then the Nazir could already drink wine. So it seems that there's a machloket when the Nazirut ends. Is it in the middle or even at the beginning of this ceremony, or you have to wait till the very end of the ceremony? Daf 46, the Gemara says, again, as I mentioned, based on the verse, whether you have to conclude everything or just one part for the Nazirut to be to conclude. As we mentioned, the Nazir has to do tnufa, which is this waving. In other cases, waving is not essential, but here in Nazir, it is essential. Now, if it's essential, now the Gemara asks, right, what if the Nazir doesn't have a hand? So then you can't put the stuff in his hand and he can't wave it around. Can they still complete the process? The Gemara asks another question. Let's say the Nazir is bald, doesn't have any hair, but we said that the Nazir has to shave. So you can't shave if you don't have any hair. So Beit Shammai says they don't need to shave because you can't. Beit Hillel says they actually have to pass a razor over their head, even though they're not really doing anything. It's still like a ceremonial. The Gemara explains that when Beit Shammai say he doesn't need to shave, it means they're actually messed up because they can't do the concluding ceremony. Therefore, they cannot conclude the Nizirut. So, lesson: if anybody's bald, do not take upon yourself nizirut. Um, a right. The Gemara talks about other cases where you need all certain body parts to conclude different scenarios. The mitzorah, the leper, needs to put blood on their thumb and on their big toe. What if they don't have it? Um, and the same thing as we mentioned in terms of shaving as well. Okay, next Mishnah on 46. Um, if the person shaved after bringing one sacrifice and then the sacrifice was invalidated for whatever reason, the shaving is now invalid because we don't have any sacrifice that was brought before. And basically, let's say it was the second or the third sacrifice, all the sacrifices that they brought before, afterwards, sorry, any sacrifice brought afterwards becomes invalid. If the person shaved after the chatat and it was brought not for its designated purpose, again, that's a form of messing up or invalidating the sacrifice. And then they brought the rest of the sacrifices properly. So then the shaving and the sacrifices are invalid again because they were messed up. The same thing for the olah or the shlamim, the same idea. Everything gets messed up from that point and on. Or, right, Rabbi Shimon says, right, this sacrifice is invalid, but the rest of them are valid. If the person shaved after all of the sacrifices and one was valid, then the shaving is valid, and then you have to just bring new sacrifices, whichever one got messed up. So the Gemara says at the bottom of 46 and on to 47, right, Rabbi Shimon holds that you can shave after any type of shlamim. And therefore he would be okay. The Mishnah on Daf 47, a Nazir, let's say a Nazir brought one sacrifice, then they became impure. Now we have a problem, right? Rabbi Eliezer says he loses all of the Nizirut that he just completed because he didn't complete it. The sages say, no, you wait 7 days to become pure, you bring the rest of the sacrifices, and then you are okay. And then there's a story of Miriam the Termudit, who was a Nazirah. She was a Nazir, who she brought one sacrifice, and then her daughter died, and then they told her to bring the rest of her sacrifices and then to purify herself. So that worked out for her. Rabbi Eliezer says, you don't lose all of the days prior, rather just all the sacrifices of that the person brought at that time. And with that, we finish the 6th chapter of Masechet Nazir. Let's move on. On Daf 47, a new chapter, and now we're going to get, as I mentioned, I don't know, a little bit, maybe a little gruesome, but since we're continuing to talk about impurity, we're going to talk about the different ways a Nazir can become impure. Not can, but it is prohibited for the Nazir to touch these things. So a high priest, a Kohen Gadol, and a Nazir cannot become impure even for their relatives. Right before we discussed a regular Kohen, now we're talking about a Kohen Gadol, a high priest, and a Nazir. They're not allowed to become impure. However, as I mentioned before, they can become impure for a met mitzvah, right? This unattended corpse. If you're walking down the street and you see a body, you need to drop everything, literally, and dig a grave and bury the person. And here the Mishnah actually says it explicitly. If they were what if they're both walking together, and they found this corpse? Rabbi Eliezer says the high priest becomes impure. The um, we mentioned. Oh, can you hear me now? Sorry. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Okay. Sorry. I guess I lost you for a minute. Okay. Um, so we mentioned the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol. There are two types of high priests. One was, and this is during the time of the first temple, what's called Kohen Mashuach. Mashuach means anointed. It sounds like Mashiach, but it means anointed. We actually, this week's Parsha talked about the oil of anointing. So that Kohen Gadol is seen on a higher level, as opposed to after the destruction of the first temple, the Kohen Gadol had a lot, right, had the clothing of the Kohen Gadol, but they were not anointed. So again, now we're saying, right, which one becomes impure if they're together. So it seems that it's the one that's not anointed is the one who should bury the body. What if you have a um, previous, right, what we would call maybe the high priest emeritus? Um, Basically, what happened was he substituted someone, so he became a Kohen Gadol, and then the other guy came back. So he can't go down to regular Kohen because that's not appropriate, but he doesn't keep the job because he was just like the stand-in for the other guy. Um, and versus so let's say he was anointed, but we have a current Kohen Gadol who was not anointed. So we say the retired Kohen Gadol is the one who buries the body because he's currently not working in the temple. Um, and right, okay. So then we have again the Kohen Gadol who isn't currently serving in the temple. Um, Versus right one who is, let's say, impure at the moment versus a Kohen Gadol who has a blemish, right? The blemish is permanent. So he's the one who should deal with the corpse because he doesn't really work, as opposed to the other one who is temporary. What about an anointed Kohen Gadol for war? This is another type of Kohen, versus the Sgan Kohen Gadol. Sgan is the deputy Kohen Gadol. He's the helper. Which one is more sanctified? Here they say that the priest anointed for war should deal with the corpse. In respect to saving them, right? Let's say you can only get to one of them first. The anointed one should be saved first. Um, Okay. Again, let's say the Kohen Gadol or the Nazir were alone. They deal with the Meit Mitzvah, right? They stop everything and they deal with the dead body. Daf 48. The Nazir and the Kohen Gadol cannot become impure to a dead body, but as I mentioned before, they can touch a leper, right? Another type of impurity. We have a Braita that compares the Kohen Gadol to the Nazir. Both, as we mentioned, cannot become impure to a dead body. There are different sources for this, and the Nazir isn't compared to a regular Kohen who can become impure for their father. And if you remember, we started this class with talking about the regular Kohen who can become impure for the father, right, the parents, the siblings, and the children. The Gemara reviews that here. Let's say a person, now we're talking about a regular person, is on their way to do Korban Pesach. We actually did this in Masechet Pesachim, or they're going to do a Brit Milah, right? So they're going to do a mitzvah, one of which is you have to be pure to do that mitzvah. And then they heard that a relative died. So then they do not become impure because we don't want them to miss out on this mitzvah. They do the mitzvah first and then they become impure. But if it's a meit mitzvah, as I mentioned before, you drop everything and you become impure for that corpse. Okay, Daf 49. Okay, as we mentioned, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, cannot become impure for any immediate relatives. There is a verse that teaches each one of those ideas. Um, the obviously he can also the Kohen Gadol cannot become impure for a distant relative, as we mentioned, or even a close relative. And the blood, and we'll get into a few more details of this, but a revi'it of blood um, that comes from two different corpses, if they come together, those do make tumat ohel, as I mentioned, the impurity of under a canopy or a structure. Um, so the Nazir and the Kohen need to stay away from this. And now we have a pretty, again, descriptive Mishnah about corpse or tumat met. The following things make a Nazir impure and would lead him to have to shave and either start again or count more of their Nazirut. So what makes a person tameh met? If they touch a dead body or a kazayit, an olive amount of a dead body, or a kazayit, an olive amount of what's called netzel. Netzel is um, liquefied, sorry to be visual, but liquefied, decomposed corpse as opposed to, right, Lynn asked before, a ladle full of corpse dust. This is dry. And Lynn asked a question at the beginning. Uh, 1 second, I have to get to it. She asked, right, does the spoonful of corpse dust also imply cremation remains we might come across in the modern world? And the answer is yes. Cremation, right, any ash of a dead body, or right again, decomposed right in a grave. If you dig up a dead body, any part of that decomposed corpse does convey tumat met. So that's the answer to your question. Also, the spine and skull of a skeleton, right? The limb of a corpse, the limb of a living person, meaning what's called ever min hachai. Um, if a limb is amputated, it transmits uh, tumat met, which is interesting. Um, Again, and here the Gemara says only, the Mishnah says only if it has flesh on it, um, and then a what's called a chatzi kav, a certain amount of bones. Again, this is presumably not necessarily all from one corpse, but let's say a collection of bones, or a chatzi log about of blood. That's to answer Zohar's questions, or asked about gathering blood. Zohar mentions zaka. I don't know if everyone is familiar with this. We have an organization here in Israel that anytime, unfortunately, when there are terror attacks, there are people who come to collect any um, bodily remains. This is all based on this, meaning, again, as I mentioned, I know that on one hand this seems very technical. On the other hand, some might say that this seems very gory. But I think what's important to recognize is that the Gemara is telling us that every part of a human being is cherished, is valued, is significant. And therefore, as Zohar is mentioning, right, for Zaka, we have people who are trained to collect all of these. Again, unfortunately, body parts, blood, all different things, because we treat it with sanctity, right? It's interesting because here we're talking about impurity, but the other side of that coin is that we're saying that these things are significant. By saying that they're significant, we're saying, right, we value every part of a person, and therefore it's important to recognize the importance of all of these parts. One second. No cartoon status. Yes. So Lynn is asking about tuma impurity status nowadays. The assumption is that most people walking around nowadays are what's called right impure to dead bodies, which means if you've ever been in a cemetery, if you've ever um, um, been in contact with a dead body, you are tamemet, and therefore, yes, as Lynn mentioned, there is no halachic, there is no significance to that nowadays, but yeah. Uh, Yes, correct. There's no significance to that nowadays. Everybody's impure. Yes. Okay. Let's continue in the Mishnah on Daf 49. If a Nazir touches any one of these things, or carries them, or is in an ohel, right, with these things, they become impure. A bone the size of barley, right? So you can understand again, we're saying very small. If a person touches it or carries it, they become impure, not ohel. Ohel needs um, um, a bigger thing. The Nazir shaves for all of these things that I just mentioned, and then gets sprinkled, as I mentioned, with the water, with the ashes on day 3 and 7, and then we lose all previous Nizirut days and can't start counting until the person is pure and brought a sacrifice. So the Gemara at the bottom of 49 tells us that when Rabbi Meir died, Rabbi Yehuda didn't want any of his students to enter the Beit Midrash, the study hall, and to argue with him. I think this is just a fascinating commentary in terms of what did the study halls look like, the yeshivot, right? People have different opinions. Rabbi Yehuda didn't want any of Rabbi Meir's students to argue with him. But Sumchus, who was the student of Rabbi Meir, kind of like snuck inside and argued anyway, specifically about our Mishnah. Okay, the last daf for today, right? So now these are students that are arguing. Rabbi Yossi made peace, right? He said, it's a beautiful line, right? He says, Rabbi Meir died, Rabbi Yehuda got angry, and I'm going to stay quiet. No, I have to do something. So I thought that was a very powerful line. And he explains the discrepancy that basically corpse in our Mishnah is one without flesh, or maybe it's discussing an aborted fetus. So that would also transmit impurity. Or again, if we're talking about a skeleton or certain amounts of bones, how much of them transmit impurity and how much don't. Now, the Gemara talks about netzel. Again, netzel is this like liquidy, decomposed flesh. It seems that the Gemara tells us if you boil it up, it actually if you heat it up, it bubbles. That's how you know that it's netzel and it's not another type of bodily fluid. Interestingly, the Gemara teaches us that saliva or mucus from a dead body do not convey tumat met. However, this decomposed flesh does. Again, I apologize for the graphic nature of these dapim. From here, the Gemara kind of goes on a tangent. We stop talking about the Nazir who's becoming impure, and we just talk about decomposing flesh. The Gemara asks if that is only an issue for a human corpse, or is there a concept of an animal that dies? Does it also convey impurity once it starts to decompose? And since we're talking about impurity and liquid, the Gemara talks about another concept. This is called in Hebrew nitzok, and it basically, the question is, let's say I have two liquids and I pour one to the other. The bottom one is impure for whatever reason, and the top one is pure. What if I pour, right? Let's say I have milk and I pour it into my bowl of milk that for some reason is impure. The stream of liquid that now connects the two liquids does that basically transmit the tum'ah, the impurity from the bottom vessel up into the upper vessel, right? Obviously, if you're pouring impure into pure, everything becomes impure. The question is, does it go the other way? And here the Gemara says that it does not transmit impurity unless, except for, right, most liquids do not, except for two types of honey that are very thick. And here, Beit Shammai adds, you can also add to this two types of porridge that, again, are very thick. And when they pour, it so Beit Shammai explains why does it transmit back up into the container. Beit Shammai says because these things are so thick, then if you've ever poured, I think it's like with like good maple syrup, when you like pour it and then you stop, like some of it goes like back up into the bottle. So Beit Shammai says, right, when you have something very thick, I guess if it's like viscous, I don't know if anybody's a physicist that deals with liquids, but like if it's very like thick, but also I guess kind of like, I think the word is viscous or like elastic, right? It kind of like goes back up into the container, and that will transmit the impurity up into the container. Another explanation is not that it goes back up, but when you pour something, let's say thick, think of honey, when you pour it, because it's so thick, it's as if you're connecting the two, containers, and therefore it does transmit the impurity. And the last thing on the daf is this ladle full of the corpse dust. The Gemara asks, what is a ladle full? One option is it's a palm full, meaning just from right your knuckles to your wrist, or from your fingertips to your knuckles, which seemingly could be the same amount. I don't know, you can try it at home. Or another opinion is an entire fistful. That's obviously a little bit more. Either way, it is a relatively small amount of this dust. And it goes back to Lynn's question. If a body is cremated, it is important. Someone on another list had mentioned that it seems to be a phenomenon that some people want to be buried in Israel, but don't want to pay for the I don't want to use the word shipping fee. That doesn't sound right. But for the fee to put the casket on the plane, so some people then elected to cremate the body, which is against Jewish law, and then bring that urn onto the plane. Now, that would be really problematic if you have Kohanim on the plane. Again, right, everyone is then under the same roof. It is extremely problematic. So I'm just putting that out there. I guess one would say, do not try this at home. Say that again. Wait, Lynn just asked a question. Like mavushal wine to be used by non-Jews when pouring, transmission contact with the stream. No, no, a different mechanism. Okay, Lynn is asking, is it that you're transmitting, when we were talking about the impurity, is it the same thing when we're talking about, here we're talking about non-mavushal wine, meaning not pasteurized wine or unpasteurized wine, is not allowed to be poured by a non-Jew. The idea there is not about purity or impurity. It is a different mechanism that is dealing with what's called yain nesef, which was dealing with idolatry. We're concerned that a non-Jew, again, an idol worshiper, will pour off a little bit of the wine. Again, non-mavushal wine is seen as fancier, and therefore they might, use it as a libation for their idolatry. So it is a different mechanism. But excellent Gemara thinking. So keep up the great learning and wishing everyone a wonderful week and a Shabbat Shalom. And looking forward to next week's shir. Those of you who are interested, you should just know that Web Yeshiva has numerous shiurim classes on the Seder night. I'm not sure if it's every night. It might be. Every night is a different class on a part of the Seder. So if any of you are interested, it seems like really great shiurim. I think I'm giving one maybe next Tuesday before our class. So you can look up on the website and feel free to join me. I think it's next Tuesday, but check it. You can check it out. So enjoy and wishing everyone a wonderful week.